All right, let's get started. So good evening. My name is Susie Plott, and I am the Community Development and Marketing Manager for Old Mission Santa Barbara. It is my pleasure to welcome you this evening. We are excited to continue our speaker series tonight on this really important topic. A reminder that we are recording the sessions and it'll be posted on our website for the community, as we think it is important that is available for everybody. A few housekeeping items. A reminder that all attendees are on mute and video screens are turned off. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'll be keeping an eye on them during the presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A session. Also a reminder that the speaker series is offered free, as we think that this is an important conversation for us to be talking about. However, please know that we are paying the speakers as we value their time and the work that they're putting into their presentations. So if you would like to support the mission and this speaker series, there will be a donation link sent out afterwards. This is totally optional and not required at all, but we do appreciate all of your support and just being here this evening. I would now like to introduce Brother Mark, our guardian at Old Mission Santa Barbara.
Hello, thanks for taking part in our webinar. This is the second of a series of 5. We at the mission, the staff and the priors are aware of what's going on in our local area and our nation and the world. And we want to focus on the theme of racism and how we can present alternatives to that as Franciscans and as Christians. So we are, the mission is built on Franciscan values. And I'd like to just teach you 2 of them. One value we have is fraternity. So fraternity comes from the Latin word frater, and that means brother. So the friars always live together. We're a brotherhood. There's 25 of us living at the Mission Santa Barbara. So if you think of brotherhood, if you think of fraternity, you think of relationships. My favorite word in the whole English language is the word justice. And justice just means making relationships right. It's not about fairness. It's not about economics. It's about making relationships right. So in churches or here at the mission, we would call ourselves a community. This fraternity is male only. Well, we're a community, women and men who want to work on the value of justice and live that out. We want to make relationships right. And today we have a friend of the missions who wants to talk to you about his family, the relationships in his family, and the relationships that extend beyond that. I don't know about you, but whenever I go to a webinar or a conference or a class, I'd rather hear somebody tell their personal story than getting bombarded with too much information. That's all book learning. So I'm happy that James is going to present his own personal story and then teach us the truth about his Chumash ancestors and how it blends into life in the mission in the year 2020. So James Yee is our presenter. He was born in Santa Barbara and he was raised in Goleta. James is a descendant of a long line of Native American Chumash ancestors who have lived in the Santa Barbara area for untold generations. James has a master's degree in education from Temple University at the Japan campus. He is the former chairman of the Barbareño Band of Chumash Indians. And currently, he is a graduate student at the University of California, Santa Barbara in the Department of Linguistics, where he is studying the language of his ancestors. So, looking forward to James, to what you have to present, and I turn this over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for your kind introduction, Brother Mark. I'm going to set up my share screen. So just a moment, everyone. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Yee, and sorry, just a moment. I'm a member of the Barbareño Band of Chumash Indians, the BBCI. In fact, until just a few weeks ago, I was the tribal chairman of the BBCI. And the Barbareño Chumash, as you might know, are the descendants of the indigenous peoples who once lived in what is now known as Santa Barbara, Goleta, and other areas of Santa Barbara County. So I'm happy to be a part of this 5-speaker series exploring the role of race and ethnicity in California history. And I'm with you today to talk about my recent involvement with the Santa Barbara mission and also the reasons behind my involvement. And as Brother Mark mentioned, my talk will be a relating of my personal experiences. And my talk will touch on the roles of race and ethnicity from the perspective of just one member of the Barbareño Chumash community. So I can't say that I represent all Chumash in Santa Barbara. I only represent and speak for myself and talk about my personal experience. Okay, so my presentation today will be in 3 parts. In part 1, I will discuss the roots of my family's relationship with the mission. In part 2, I will talk about our tribal organization, the BBCI. And in part 3, I will discuss our tribe's cultural activities here at the mission. So all members of the BBCI come from old Chumash families who have lived on this land for many years. Although today, I will be talking about my family. Please remember that each BBCI family has a history that is worthy of our respect and admiration for persevering in the face of daunting odds as their whole way of life and culture changed around them. So my family's relationship with the Santa Barbara mission is a story that goes back more than 230 years. Actually, to the time when the Spanish and representatives of the Catholic Church first came to live in present-day Santa Barbara County. So my 4th grade grandparents, Lihui Sanaitset and Alehe Hanawa, they were born in the village of Shniwak. Shniwak is on the other side of these coastal mountains, kind of close to where Los Prietos Boys Camp is. And we know that my 4th great grandmother, Alehe Hanawa, she was born in the year 1769. And that was the same year the Portola expedition came overland from Baja California. And later, these grandparents, they moved to the seaside village of Siuktan. So it was the political capital on the waterfront where West Beach is now. And my 4th great grandfather, Lihui Sanaitset, he assumed a hereditary position of a chief at this village. Lihui Sanaitset and Alehe Hanawa, they had a daughter. And the story that has been passed down to us is that she became sick with a respiratory infection. The Spanish-speaking people called it the dolor de costado. And it was a sickness from which many people died. So the padre at the mission told her parents that if they would allow her to be baptized, she would recover from her illness. So she was baptized and she did recover. And this was in the year 1803. And the name given to this young child was Maria Ignacia, the name you might have seen before or heard of before. So this baptism and two other family relatives who were baptized earlier in 1789 and 1791, those baptisms began my family's official relationship with the Santa Barbara Mission. So in the years following, many of my family members, my ancestors, were baptized at the mission, and many of them are buried there. And it is from this time that my family on my father's mother's side became Roman Catholic, and by the grace of God, we have remained Roman Catholic to this day. I'd like to state here that I'm fully aware of the suffering our ancestors endured during this time because of policies of the Spanish government and the Catholic Church. I personally experienced and witness effects of that suffering continuing to this day in our Native community. And suffering can take many forms, forms present not only in our community, they occur, of course, in other Native communities and also non-Native communities too. But the root causes in our community and in Native communities all across this land are really unique to the Native American communities. Alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, suicide, mental illness, low self-esteem, incarceration, and other things such as distrust and hatred of Caucasians and the institutions they represent. So these are symptoms that exist in our communities, and they're indicative of deeper causes brought about in the Barbareño Chumash case by loss of culture, alienation from the land, complete subjugation, dispersal, and assimilation of a whole people into the larger dominant society. So I believe that in our Native community, these root causes have never been addressed. So I recall one story passed down in our family, and it's about my great-grandmother's brother, Tomas Ignacio, who was born in the 1870s. He died in Santa Barbara in the early 1950s. He's buried in the Mission Mausoleum. So many years ago, when family members would sit around the fire after dinner and tell the old stories, they would talk about the old times when the villages still teemed with the Chumash who lived in them. So my great-great-uncle Tomas, he would become very silent, and his face would become serious and sad, and he would gaze into the fire. And I often wonder what suffering he endured and what were the scars on his heart. So I won't bore you with too many personal details, but I do want to say that suffering for me can manifest as a deep and persistent ache in my heart, really like in my emotions, I feel. When I drive past the Santa Barbara airport, for example, the area that was possibly the most densely populated area in pre-Spanish California. So the centerpiece of that historical location was the island, which the Chumash called Qua. You might know it as Mescalitan Island. And it once hosted a very large, thriving Chumash village, but most of the island was destroyed to provide fill for the airport runways during the war, during World War II. So graves of our ancestors were also desecrated and destroyed in the process. And when I drive past the airport, I see the remnants of the island, and I remember what the price was of building that airport, and it really weighs heavy on my heart. For other members of our tribe, the suffering is more constant and salient, manifesting in many different ways, which I will not recount here. But I will say this. So in my personal opinion, speaking for myself, I do not feel that formal apologies, nor financial or other compensation, or even the removal of statues, for example, the Father Sarah statue. So even that will never make up for the scars on our hearts caused by what our people have experienced. It is my belief that healing will only occur in our community when we, the Barbareño Chumash people, take responsibility for our own healing. And a large part of that process of healing is reclaiming by our own efforts the cultural heritage that was taken away from us, and also regaining by our own efforts pride in being Chumash. So these two objectives are what I focus my efforts on in our Barbareño Chumash community. By our own efforts, reclaiming our lost cultural heritage and regaining pride in being Chumash. And these two goals constitute the foundation for the present relationship that I have been a part of with the Santa Barbara Mission during my time as BBCI Tribal Chair, and that I, as an individual member of my family, helped to continue. And it's a relationship that has endured for over 230 years. So in the next part of this presentation, part 2, I will discuss our tribal organization, the Barbareño Band of Chumash Indians, the BBCI. And I would first like to say that our tribe's story is totally different from other groups in this area that call themselves natives and Chumash. Our ancestral villages and ancestors are totally different from the vast majority of members of these other groups. I can say with confidence that members of the BBCI are proud to tell who our ancestors were, and we're proud to tell their names and also where they came from. So we will always be proud to tell their stories in an unbroken chain, as has been done for hundreds and probably thousands of years. So the following narrative I will relate is part of our story too. So after secularization of the mission system in the 1830s, many Chumash families that formerly lived at the Santa Barbara Mission, they moved to our reservation at the place our ancestors called Casua. The Spanish-speaking people called this area La Cieneguita, and it's located near the present-day intersection of Modoc Road and Hollister Avenue. The last Chumash families were forcibly removed from their homes on our reservation in the late 1880s. And you might ask, who ended up with title to our reservation land? Who ended up with ownership? The government appointed Indian agent ended up with title to our land. And I tell you this story not to make you feel sorry for us, but just to let you know that this is the history we come from. The suffering did not end with the departure of the Spanish. So from that time in the late 1880s until today, we remain a landless tribe with all the consequences that brings and which we live with today and which we feel every day. Continuing with our tribal organization, in 2014, representatives of families from our reservation met to discuss the possibility of bringing together all the main families again. And this effort marked the first time in over 130 years that our families would join together to be the voice of the Chumash with cultural and land stewardship activities on our ancestral lands. So we established a 501c3 nonprofit on which the tribal organization is based. And after much soul searching, we formed a mission statement. The mission of the BBCI is to lead the Barbareño Chumash as we revitalize our culture, protect our ancestral lands, and share our heritage with the community. And that means with the surrounding communities. So at this time in 2014, the odds of regaining our culture and bringing the people together were not in our favor. First of all, the descendants of our families were all scattered. So after we lost our reservation, family members dispersed to the four corners of California and around the United States, many of them assimilating into the dominant culture and gradually losing their identity as Chumash. Second, we had almost no one with cultural knowledge, like who could sing our songs or dance our dances, weave the baskets, or make medicine from plants, or perform the ceremonies, to name just a few areas of cultural knowledge. So who could do these things, and also who could teach these things? And third, the last native speaker of Shmuich, also known as Barbareño Chumash, had died in 1965, and that was my father's mother, my grandmother. So nobody knew the language, which, as I will explain in more detail later, is a crucial element to our success. So to say the odds were stacked against us regaining our culture and bringing the people together again would be an understatement. However, we had two things in our favor. So first of all, we had extensive language documentation by the ethnographer and linguist John P. Harrington. So he traveled throughout California and the Southwest early in the last century, so more than 100 years ago. And he talked with the disappearing last native speakers, documenting their language and cultural practices. So Harrington spent much time with 3 members of my family at different times from 1914 until his death in 1961. So he talked with my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my great-great-grandmother. So almost 50 years he worked with members of my family at different times. He also worked with other Shmuich native speakers such as Juan Justo, and also there were other linguists who documented the language. One of them, Madison Beeler, worked with my grandmother for several years in the 1950s. So there's a very large amount of documentation on our language, cultural practices, history of the people, places, and the natural environment of this area. Another point in our favor towards gathering the people and regaining our cultural practices, we have a growing wave of Barbareño Chumash descendants. And this includes the dedicated individuals who are part of the BBCI Tribal Council. And this growing wave of descendants, they're interested in learning about their ancestors and Barbareño Chumash culture, language, and history. So this is a really great point in our favor. And I can also add a third point, a third element. So we have a network of close supporters. And these supporters realize that our own efforts must form the basic foundation to reclaim our heritage, but they support us wholeheartedly in that effort with their time, expertise, and friendship. And this is really important to us. And this leads us to the third part of my presentation. So I will talk about cultural activities we are engaged in at the mission. So for me, language is a vital element of our cultural revival. Language is intimately related with worldview, giving us a glimpse into how our ancestors viewed the world around them. And language is a vehicle by which meaning is conveyed in songs, stories, and the words used in ceremonies. And language also gives us identity, among other things. It differentiates Ohlone and Yokuts from Chumash. It differentiates Obispeño Chumash from Ventureño and Barbareño Chumash from Inaseño. And for me, in addition to gathering the people, revitalizing the sleeping language of Barbareño Chumash to a place of prominence for our people has for these last few years remained a key element to our cultural and identity revival. And I say only for the last few years because I lived abroad for more than half of my life. I'm 55 now. I lived abroad for about 26 years. I came back to Santa Barbara, Goleta, about 6 years ago. So my awakening to my Chumash identity has only started from that time. When I was younger, I would often hear my father tell stories that he heard from his mother, from his relatives, but I never had a sense of being Chumash. So only for these last 4 or 5 years that have I had a sense of being Chumash. So earlier in my life, I had spent some years teaching English in Tokyo and Yokohama, Japan. And this experience with teaching language got me interested in Shmuich, the Barbareño Chumash language. And I began teaching it in 2017. In 2018, the Santa Barbara Mission invited us to hold language classes at the Rancho Room near La Huerta. And we have continued there since that time. Of course, going online because of COVID. And I've tried to integrate the language into our organizational activities. And although it was slow going at first, it seems like recently our members are becoming more used to the language and actually want to speak and learn it, which is very heartwarming for me. So in 2017, I was asked to give the Chumash blessing at the mission for the Fiesta Pequeña event. I also gave the blessing in the following 2 years. And in October 2017, after the desecration of the mission with graffiti and paint, the BBCI drafted a letter which told of the mission's importance to our tribe. And you can read that letter on NewsHawk, the online newspaper, the October 2017 letters to the editor section, if you'd like to look at it. I think also it's on our BBCI website. And then also in late 2018, because of our growing relationship with the mission, I had a talk with Father Dan at the Paradise Cafe, and I conveyed to him that I would like to revitalize our relationship with the mission in 3 key areas. So in the cultural area, and historical, and also spiritual. And these represent key areas of mission life that our ancestors participated in at the mission, especially cultural and spiritual. So since that time, with the cooperation of the mission community leadership, revitalizing our relationship in these 3 key areas have been the guiding framework for activities the BBCI has been involved in at the mission. So in addition to ongoing language classes, there are also basket weaving gatherings held at the mission and organized by our close friend and supporter, Susan Robles. And these gatherings started in 2015. In July 2019, we held the first annual Chumash Culture Day, Camp Hus. Hus means bear in the Barbareño Chumash language. And this was a culture day for Barbareño Chumash children. And this summer camp was held in the Mission Huerta. Children and their parents participated in a variety of cultural activities, including language activities, traditional games, making clapper sticks, learning about native plants, storytelling, and many more activities. And later, after a barbecue prepared by Jerry Sortome, Chumash children and families gathered for lunch. And to my knowledge, this was the first event of its kind exclusively for Barbareño Chumash children and their parents. In September 2019, the Mission Huerta was the site for another event, and this was the afternoon of Chumash storytelling. And under the beautiful trees of the Huerta, we told and heard our beloved Chumash stories. And these were the stories heard by our ancestors when our ancestors were still children, in an unbroken line going back who knows how many years. In October 2019, in the Mission Bonaventure Room, members of Santa Barbara Parish and the Chumash community were invited to hear an introductory lecture on the history and basic features of Shmuich, the Barbareño Chumash language. On winter solstice in 2018 and 2019, members of the Santa Barbara community gathered in the mission church and outside in front of the mission as they usually do. And this time, as the sun illuminated the altar, the walls and foundation of the church echoed once again with the sounds of the Chumash language after these many, many years, this time in the words of the Our Father recited in the native language. And to commemorate the Chumash revolt of February 1824, the 11 o'clock a.m. Mass on February 23rd of this year was offered up for the repose of souls of Chumash who died in the revolt. And afterwards, a small ceremony was held in the mission cemetery to honor the memory of those who died. And I'd like to mention that for some of these events, while some were very successful with a really good turnout, I still hope that more members of our Chumash community will participate in the future. And I really think that participation is tied to our efforts of reawakening the sense of Chumash identity in members. So with the awakening of identity comes a corresponding desire to learn more about our culture and history, as was the case in my own, for me too. So this is where the BBCI stands at this time in 2020. As we gather the people again, we are reclaiming our culture and teaching it to our young ones. We are learning and teaching our language. We are protecting and speaking out on behalf of the lands where our ancestors sleep. We are learning about and honoring our ancestors. We are regaining pride in our Chumash heritage and ancestry. We are establishing a strong presence and concrete ties with surrounding communities, including the Santa Barbara mission community, reaffirming the relationship that, in my family's case, began over 230 years ago. So the relationship between my family and the mission has been very close, and I sincerely hope that in the future, more and stronger bridges of friendship can be forged between other Chumash families and the mission community. So I've taken the time today to discuss three things: the roots of my family's relationship with the mission, a little about our tribal organization, the Barbareño Band of Chumash Indians, BBCI, and our tribe's cultural activities here at the mission. So I would like to thank the mission community leadership, especially Father Dan and Monica Orozco, for their vision for a mission community that once again includes the Barbareño Chumash. I'd like to thank Father Larry, Brother Mark, Tina Foss, and other members of the mission community who have extended the hand of understanding and friendship to the Barbareño Chumash as we reestablish a relationship based on cultural, historical, and spiritual ties. So healing has been a long time coming for the Barbareño Chumash people in Santa Barbara. And even as we take responsibility for our own healing, we welcome the support, encouragement, and prayers of the mission community and our other supporters too. And as we continue on the road to reclaiming our cultural heritage and taking pride again in being Chumash, I ask for God's blessing that the long journey will continue, that my family will continue the strong relationship with the Santa Barbara mission. And I ask for the grace of God's blessing so that healing will at last take place in the hearts of the members of our Barbareño Chumash community members and people in the Santa Barbara community. And may God bless you and your families. And thank you for listening to my presentation. The journey continues, my family's long association with the Santa Barbara mission. And do you have any questions?
So yes, we actually do have quite a few questions that have already come in.
Okay.
If you want to end the sharing,
Yes.
perfect. So then hopefully people can see both of us. All right, so one question that is actually two that I'm gonna merge together a little bit, I think covers it, is many people kind of mention that they have heard of the Chumash, but had not heard the term Barbareño. Can you say a little bit more about, is this a subgroup of the Chumash, and really understanding, the discussing the diversity along the Chumash people, and are there different languages among you and the different bands?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So there are different, although it's kind of a lot of people think that the Chumash are just one tribe, one consolidated monolithic tribe, but actually there's different groups. So there's the Ventureño Chumash, Barbareño Chumash, there's the Inaseño at San Ynez, there's the Obispeño, San Luis Obispo. There's, so those are the main groups today, the four main groups. There's also, so divided by language, there's also, for example, Island Chumash from Santa Cruz and Santa Rosa, San Miguel Islands. There's, the language was different also for the interior Chumash. So for example, areas of the Cuyama Valley, and also in near Lompoc, the Purismeño. So these are, they occupied different territories, but now we have these groupings based mostly on languages that were spoken around the different missions. So the Barbareño Chumash refers to the Chumash language or dialect, separate language that was spoken around the Santa Barbara mission. But so we've come to associate the different groups with the missions with which they are associated. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that helps clarify a little bit, because I think people have heard of the Chumash in general, but not necessarily of the different groups. So thank you for clarifying. There's another question that says, what geographic region was inhabited by the Chumash people?
Oh, so the traditional Chumash homelands extended from Malibu in the south up to, I think around Morro Bay in the north, and then going east to the Central Valley, I believe, to the very southern portion of the Central Valley.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
That was the area of the Chumash.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
Another question says, what does the Barbareño language tell us about her? How have you found that language revitalization assists in cultural revitalization?
Oh, Susie, can you repeat the first part of that question?
Of course. So it says, what does the Barbareño language tell us about the culture? And then the second part, of course, was how have you found language revitalization to assist in cultural revitalization?
Yeah, that's a really deep question that gets to the heart of why language is so important. So first of all, these linguists that were traveling around in the early 20th century and mid 20th century, so the knowledge that they recorded from their Chumash, we call them consultants, for example, my grandmothers, so everything was written down in the language of the people. So when you talk about, for example, the different names for plants and the uses for plants, or different, even like different parts of the associated with the tomo, the Chumash plank canoe. So everything was conveyed through the Chumash language that refers to cultural practices. So that's like the foundation. I mean, there's different cultural practices, but everything was conveyed through the language. And then, so language for cultural revitalization. Yeah, language is so important, and it gives us such a sense of identity that it's my feeling that it forms the basis for almost everything we do. I mean, we could talk about, you could talk about the plants, for example, that were important to the Chumash, and you could use English to describe it, but that might miss something with how the Chumash people viewed the relationship with the plants. So putting it into their language, I think gives a greater sense of how the Chumash people of long ago viewed these different cultural practices. And for me, I think that's why language is so important. It really forms the foundation for all of these cultural practices because language is such a big part of the culture. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. I know it's a complicated issue.
Yeah, it is complicated.
Yeah. That's wonderful. We have another question that asks, is the BBCI working towards federal recognition, especially considering the documentation available?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at one point we were recognized. We had a government appointed Indian agent. Yeah, I would have to say, well, if things are if things work out, we'd like to possibly pursue federal recognition in the future.
Good answer. We have another person that said, I'm so happy to be here tonight listening to your talk, James. What a treasure you are for the Chumash tribe and community as a whole.
Oh, thank you.
They said that I am from New Mexico and have Native, Spanish, and Caucasian ancestry, and I'm always trying to reconcile my ancestry with being a Catholic. Can you speak to this for yourself?
Yeah, it's been, it's such an important question for me personally, because I have ancestry, so Chumash and Chinese. My parents' family came from Mexico and also Caucasian as well. So for me too, I never really felt like I fit in, like in the Mexican community, because I didn't speak the language. I didn't feel, although I had a lot of friends that were Caucasian, I didn't feel exactly comfortable considering myself Caucasian. I don't speak Chinese, so I never felt like I fit in the Chinese community. So when I started to find out about my Chumash ancestry, of course it's only one small part of who I am, but it helped to kind of clarify, especially my relationship to this land where I live here, because this is the homeland of my ancestors. So for that reason, even though it only makes up like a small part of my blood quantum, still, it helps to form a connection with this land where I grew up and where my family lives. And I think for me, that's been a really long journey in my life, and it still continues. And maybe I will express the other parts of my heritage someday, the Mexican and Chinese and Caucasian. But yeah, Chumash, my identity as Chumash, I believe will always be an important part of my identity. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and I think the question a little bit was kind of reconciling the ancestry in regards to being a Catholic. And so I don't know if you want to make any comment to that as well.
Yeah, do you mean, I wonder if you mean being Chumash versus being a Catholic. That could be, because I know that's it's kind of a sore point among a lot of Native Americans, especially in California. Well, as my aunt always says, if it wasn't the Spanish, it would have been the Russians coming north from Northern California. If it wasn't the Russians, it would have been the Americans 50 or 75 years later. I mean, there was so much pressure on the Chumash, and I think we were lucky in that our ancestors were baptized into the Catholic Church, and really, as my aunt says, that was the kind of the golden nugget that we came out of this terrible experience. We got this golden nugget that we were baptized into the Catholic Church. And for me, that's super, super important, even realizing all the other stuff associated with it, but still, that's so important.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's great. We have another comment and question here that just says, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh, you're welcome.
And then how can we open the door to continue this dialogue from others within the Barbareño band? And I know we appreciate and have a wonderful relationship with you, but we'd love to continue this conversation with others. And so how can we open that door and continue this dialogue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is to continue to extend the hand of friendship and understanding, and continue to extend the hand of wanting to, of realizing the history, but also not only the history, because I think if you dwell on that for too long, you get caught up in it, and it's just, you can't, it'll just hold you back. But I think looking at the future and then understanding that there are a lot of relationships that we can build, and I think other members of the Barbareño Chumash are, I think they would be happy to have a relationship with the mission. But I think if the mission just keeps those doors and channels of communication open, I think that's the good way to go.
Well, speaking as a representative of the mission, those doors are open. If you would like to communicate, let us know.
Thank you, Susan.
Yes. We have another question here that said that I had been attending the Coastal Band Chumash meetings and recently became enrolled. We go back to who knows, but when I can trace back to the 1700s. My family owned the Rancho Las Cruces, which is now a landmark. Do the Barbareños and the coastal bands work together on pursuing our Chumash language and cultural activities?
No, the short answer is no. And I think part of me thinks that it's because, I think it has to do with the suffering that we still endure in our Native community. This is an issue that's very, very deep, and I can't explain it all now or or hope to solve it now, but no, the Coastal Band and the Barbareño Chumash do not work together. Although, no, actually that's not true, because in the last few years, there has been a little bit more cooperation or mixing of the two groups. And even I remember sitting in on meetings with Coastal Band members present, and we even have some former Coastal Band members who have joined the Barbareño Band of Chumash Indians. So I think there's a little more cooperation going on there, but that's a very deep issue that that I think has to be addressed and hopefully come to a beneficial conclusion for all in the
Wonderful.
future.
Yeah, wonderful. And that actually addresses another comment that was in here, just asking to acknowledging and discussing about the other Chumash groups in the area, such as the Coastal Band of Chumash Nation, the Barbareño Chumash Council, etc. So I think that addressed a little bit. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that.
Yeah. So for so long, there was a vacuum in Santa Barbara on this side of the mountains. So there was no Native groups active. And so I think that's one reason why we have a lot of different groups in this area. Yeah, the Coastal Band, the Barbareño Chumash Council, and the Barbareño Band of Chumash Indians, I think are the groups that I know about in this area.
Okay, wonderful. There's a question, I'm not sure you might know the answer, but we'll put it out there. Somebody asked if you know if the DNA of different Chumash have been sampled or analyzed and looked into.
Oh, could you repeat that, Susie?
Yeah, in regards to if you know if the DNA of different Chumash have been sampled or analyzed and looked into.
Yeah, I know there's been some projects proposed to do that. But I don't know how far along those projects have gotten, actually.
Okay, wonderful. Here's a question on how would we find the writings of Harrington to read and learn more about the groups here in Santa Barbara?
I believe a lot of, so the majority of the documentation, if not all, is on the Smithsonian or is stored at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And I think they've put everything in a digital format, so it's all online, I'm pretty sure. And if you dig around on the internet, I'm sure you can find it. But you have to be careful because there's hundreds of thousands of pages of information, even only on the Barbareño Chumash. So on other tribes put together that Harrington documented, there's maybe, I don't know if millions of pages possibly. There's a lot though.
Oh, wow.
But have fun with that. There's a lot of information, a lot of juicy nuggets in there.
Okay, great, wonderful. And if you ever do have any additional resources or something that you think would be good for people to look into, please forward it to me and I'll share it.
Okay, I'll do that, Susan.
Okay, wonderful. There's another question here around going back to the Barbareño language. And so it was asking, does it consist of multiple languages or is it just one?
Yeah, there have been, there is evidence that some words have been borrowed from other languages, actually. So for example, I think there's some language influence from Yokuts is the word, sorry. Yokuts language, which is the neighboring tribe, I think out in the Central Valley, I believe, the southern part. There's also, I don't know if there's language influences or borrowings from like the southern tribes, like the Barbareño or Cahuilla, but I think there was a fair amount of borrowing going on, especially since California has so many different native languages. I think there's like over 100 in California alone. So I think there was a lot of contact with other people of other tribes, and so language was borrowed. And I do know that there was, I'm pretty sure there was borrowing between the different Chumash languages. So it's interesting that now we have these like 6 or 7 main groupings of Chumash languages, but when the Spanish first came, it was almost like every village had their own dialect. So if you consider how many Chumash villages there were probably hundreds of dialects. I think even, I heard on Santa Rosa Island, they found evidence for 14 dialects, if I'm not mistaken. 14 dialects on such a small island, wow. So that really reflects the fact that almost every village had their own dialect.
Wow, that's amazing. Along those same lines, somebody's asking, do you teach Chumash language and culture in the community?
Yeah, I do. We have our regular Barbareño Chumash language classes, which we've gotten going again on Zoom. A few times a year, I teach language classes at the mission. Actually, no, I taught the introductory class in October of last year. And I think we had plans to do it 3 times this year, but then of course COVID hit, so everything was canceled. But maybe when COVID finishes, I will have language classes in the surrounding communities, maybe more than I have done in the past.
Wonderful. How have you gone? How have you gone about learning about the Chumash and Barbareño language?
So my second language, the first language I learned besides English was Japanese. And I think the study of Japanese really helped me to learn this third language, although I'm not fluent by any means at all yet. But I think the first thing is to learn the pronunciation, because the pronunciation has a lot of, the language has many different sounds, which are very different from English. So I think that's the first part you have to learn. And then learning the vocabulary, like learning the names for animals. That's so fun, because you can walk around Goleta, Santa Barbara, and you can see the animals and say, oh, look, that's a pulakak, that's a woodpecker, or look, that's a pistuk. And it's so cool, and it just seems so natural for this area, and that's how I learned it. am learning it, not learned it.
That's great. We have a comment here that just says, thank you for providing the historical relationship of your family that it has with the mission. It says that I am Mexican on my mom's side, Chumash on my dad's, American, and overarching me as a Catholic. So much of my culture, and I have hopes for moving forward with the enrichment and pride in our culture. So thank you.
Oh, definitely. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So here's a question that says, given our history of brutality and cultural genocide associated with the mission system, why have you chosen to tie your efforts at cultural reclamation to a relationship with the mission?
That's interesting. Well, I think in general, the history of humans toward each other, I mean, you can go back, how far do you want to go back? And you can see the history of violence and killing and rape and murder for almost any group you look at throughout the world. So I don't think it's confined only to what happened when the Spanish came to California, and I don't think also it was cultural genocide, because to me, the term cultural genocide, it means that you try to wipe out the culture of the people. But if that's true, then why did the Padres allow the Chumash when they were building the mission? Because the Chumash built the mission. The Spanish Padres didn't get up there on the scaffolding, all 2 or 3 of them, and do everything. So why were the Chumash allowed? They were allowed by the Padres to incorporate parts of their culture into the mission architecture, for example. So I don't think of it as cultural genocide. And the other part to that question is, which is a very important question, and which people are really concerned about. So I think that if the Spanish didn't come in, it would have been the Russians, it would have been the Americans. And if you consider the Russians' experience with the native peoples, like lived in Alaska or Siberia even, I don't think they were very kind to the native peoples in that area. I've heard reports that they killed a lot of the natives. So, which doesn't, it's really complicated, but it doesn't make it right what happened. But I think I don't want to focus on the bad things that happened. I don't think that's going to help our communities if I focus solely on, oh, cultural genocide and rape and pillaging. If I focus only on that, our people are going to get nowhere. I don't want to focus on the negative things. I want to focus on what we can focus on. And then also the relationship to the Catholic Church, because I was baptized Catholic, and as I explained, my ancestors were Catholic going back 200 years. So that's also a very strong bond. So yeah, that's a long answer, but focus on the positive, do what you can in the present, move forward, and don't be attached to negative baggage as much as you can. That's for me personally. Everyone's different, but that's just how I feel.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question. I don't know if it did.
No, it did. Thank you. We have one final question. We're right at time. So one final question to end us. And it really feeds off of what you were saying and around the conversations around race that are happening in our local community. It's come up, suggested to, tear down the mission because it represents the suffering. But to the opposite side of that is that I've also heard that the mission, represents Chumash art. And to your point, the people who built the mission were the Chumash, and there's a lot of art representation there. And so to preserve that, I'd rather as a representation of suffering. And so I don't know if there's anything you want to say to that.
Yeah, I recommend to look at the BBCI response to the desecration of the mission that we published on Newshawk in, I think it was October 17th, 2017. That really explains our feeling. But yeah, our ancestors built the mission. I mean, the letter says that our DNA is in the walls and the foundation and the grounds. A lot of my ancestors are buried there. So why would I want to tear everything up? My ancestors, I mean, however they came, whatever reasons they came to live at the mission, still they love the mission. During the time of the Chumash revolt, the mission in the Chumash in Santa Barbara tried to protect the Padres. So they love the Padres, they love the mission. So why would I want to tear down something that my ancestors truly loved? And that's my answer. And I don't know. For other people, it might be a symbol totally different from what the meaning that I hold for the mission, but I think each person has to decide how they want to live their life, how they want to face the different things in their life. And for me, it just makes me feel better while remembering the history to concentrate on the good things. And I'm human, I make mistakes, but that's what I try to do. And that's my answer.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor and a privilege to have you with us this evening, and that you are willing to share your personal family stories with us and your perspective on such an important and sensitive topic in our community right now. So thank you very much, James.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you to everyone watching and who sent in questions.
Yes, you stole my thunder, and my next thing was to thank everyone else. So, and with that, I want to thank you all for being here, and we hope you tune in next week as we continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kiwanan.